recall how frantically, in the earliest days of my own experience, I searched for practical information that might lend a helping hand in making my work marketable. Being in the not unusual position of having to support myself, it was the pre- predicament. Being in the not unusual position of having to support myself, it was the predicament of having to make good art, having to make good an art, or being forced to turn to something else. Across this wide country, there are many of you that in that predicament. You also possessed of that unaccountable urge which seemingly comes from nowhere. Want to speak the language of art. You also possessed of that unaccountable urge. Love to draw. You wish to draw well. If there is any chance, you greatly wish to make a living at it. Perhaps I can help you. I sincerely hope so, for I think I've lived through every minute you're living now. Perhaps I can compile some of the information that experience tells me you want and need. I do not pretend to undervalue the fine work that has been done. The difficulty has always been in finding it and sorting out what is of practical value and putting it into practice. I believe that the greater chances of success lie in the mental approach to the work, rather than the sheer technical knowledge, and since the mental approach has not often been stressed, here lies the opportunity to serve you. I not only assume that my reader is interested in drawing, but that he wishes from his toes up to become an efficient, self-supporting craftsman. I assume that the desire to express yourself with pen and pencil is not only urgent but almost undeniable, that you feel you must do something about it. I feel that talent means little unless coupled with an insatiable desire to give an excellent personal demonstration of his ability. I feel also that talent must be accompanied with a capacity for unlimited effort, which provides the power that eventually hurdles the difficulties that would frustrate lukewarm enthusiasm. Let us try to define the quality which makes an artist tick. Every bit of work he does starts out with the premise that it has a message, a purpose, a job to do. What is the most direct answer, the simplest interpretation of that message you can make? Stripping a subject to its barest and most efficient essentials is a mental procedure. Every inch of the surface of his work should be considered as to whether it bears important relationship to a whole purpose. He sees, and his picture tells us the importance of what he sees and how he feels about it. Then within his picture he stresses what is of greatest importance and subordinates what must be there but is of lesser importance. He will place his area of greatest contrast above the head of the most important character. He will search diligently for means to make that character express the emotion in facial expression and pose. That is to be the all-important theme. He will first draw attention to that character by every means available. In other words, he plans and thinks and does not passively accept simply because it exists. Not far back in the annual of art, the ability to achieve just a lifelike appearance might have caused some wonder in a spectator. Enough to capture his interest. Today, with color, photography, and excellence of camera going perhaps even further in that respect, we are sure-footed with realism par excellence. And the mere lifelike representation is not enough. There is no other course than somehow to go beyond obvious facts to pertinent facts, to characterization, to emotional and dramatic, to selection and taste, to simplification, subordination, and accentuation. It is 10% how you draw and 90% what you draw. Equally defining everything within your picture area and value, edge and detail will have no more than can be achieved in photography. Subordination may be achieved by diffusion, by closeness of color and value to surrounding areas, by simplification of insistent detail, or by omission. There's no other course than somehow to go beyond. There's no other course than to go beyond the various fact to pertinent fact, to obvious. Equally defining everything new, subordination may be achieved by diffusion. By closeness of color and value to surrounding areas, by simplification of insistent detail, or by omission. Accentuation is achieved by opposite, in each case by sharpness, contrast, detail, or any added device. Sharpness, contrast, detail. Sharpness, contrast, or detail. Or any added device. I take this opportunity to impress upon you, my reader, how important you really are in the whole of art procedure. You, your personality, your individuality comes first. Your pictures are your byproduct. Everything about your picture is and should be a little of you. They will be a reflection of your knowledge, your experience, your observation, your likes and dislikes, your good taste, your thinking. So the real concentration is centered on you, and your work follows along in the wake of what mental self-improvement you are making. It has taken me a lifetime to realize that, so before we talk at all about drawing, it is important to sell you strongly on yourself. To plant that urge so definitely in your consciousness that you must know at once that most of it comes from the other end of your pencil rather than the business end. As a student, I thought there was a formula of some kind that I would get a hold of somewhere, and thereby become an artist. There is a formula, but it has not been in books. It is really old, really plain old courage, standing on one's own feet, and forever seeking enlightenment. Courage to develop your way, but learning from the other. Follow experimentation with your own ideas, observing for yourself, a rigid discipline of doing over that which you can improve. I've never found a book that stressed the importance of myself as the caretaker of my ability. I've never found a book that stressed the importance of myself as the caretaker of my ability. Of staying healthy mentally and physically, or that gave me an inkling that my courage might be strained to the utmost. Perhaps that is not the way to write books, but I can see no harm in the author realizing that he is dealing with personalities and that there is something more important than technique. In art, we are dealing with something far removed from cold science, where the human element is everything. At least I am determined to establish the fellowship with my reader, welcoming him to the craft at which I've spent so many years. If I have any blue chips I can pass on to him, I lay them before him so they may join the game. I cannot profess to know more than the experience of one individual. However, one individual experience is wide enough, might well cover many of the problems that will doubtlessly come to others. Solutions of those problems may provide like solutions. I can lay out an assortment of facts and fundamentals that were helpful to me. I can speak of the idealizations, the practical hints, and devices that will undoubtedly make drawings more saleable. Since the requirements are almost universal, and since my own experience does not vary greatly from the average experience of my contemporaries, I offer material without setting up myself and my work as a criterion. In fact, I would prefer if it were possible to subordinate my own viewpoint or technical approach and leave the reader as free as possible for individual decision and self-expression. I use my experience merely to clarify the general requirements. It should be obvious that, first of all, syllable figure drawing must be a good drawing. And good drawing means a great deal more to the professional than to the beginner. It means that a figure must be convincing and appealing at the same time. It must be of idealistic rather than literal or normal proportions. It means the figure must be convincing and appealing at the same time. It must be of idealistic rather than literal or normal proportion. It must be related in perspective to a constant eye level or viewpoint. The anatomy must be correct, whether exposed to the eye or concealed beneath drapery or costume. The light and shadow must be so handled as to impart a living quality. Expression and emotion must be convincing. Good drawing is neither an accident nor the result of an inspired moment when the muses lend a guided hand. Good drawing is neither an accident nor the result of an inspired moment when the muses lend a guiding hand. Good drawing is a coordination of many factors, all understood and handled expertly as in a delicate surgical operation. Let us say that each factor becomes an instrument or a part of a means of expression. It is when that means of expression is developed as a whole that inspiration and individual feeling come into play. It is possible for anybody to be off at any time in one or more of the factors. Every artist will do good ones and bad ones. The bad will have to be thrown out and done over. The artist should of course make a critical analysis to determine why a drawing is bad. Usually he will be forced to go back to fundamentals, for bad drawing springs from basic faults, as surely as good drawing springs from basic merits. Therefore, a useful book of figure drawing cannot treat one phase alone. As a study of anatomy, it must also seek out and coordinate all the basic factors upon which a good drawing depends. It must consider both aesthetics and sales possibilities, technical renderings and typical problems to be solved. Otherwise, the reader is only partially informed. He is taught but one angle and then left to flounder. Therefore, a useful book of figure drawing cannot treat one phase alone. As the study of anatomy, it must also seek out and coordinate all the basic factors upon which good drawing depends. It must consider both aesthetics and sales possibilities, technical rendering and typical problems to be solved. Otherwise, the reader is only partially informed. He is taught but one angle and then left to flounder. May assume that you as a young artist are facing a bread and butter problem. Whenever you achieve sufficient technical ability, there will be an income waiting for you. From that point on, your earning will increase in ratio to your improvement. In the field of practical art, the rankings stand out at the top, just as do everywhere else. There is not an advertising agency, a magazine publisher, a lithograph house, or an art dealer's that will not gladly open its doors to real ability that is new and different. It is mediocrity to which the door is closed. Unfortunately, most of us are mediocre. When we started out, by and large, most commercial artists of outstanding ability had no more than an average talent at the start. May I confess that 2 weeks after entering art school, I was advised to go back home. That experience had made me much more tolerant of inauspicious beginnings than I might otherwise have been, and it has given me additional incentive in teaching. Individuality of expression is, without question, an artist's most valuable asset. You could make no more fatal error than to attempt to duplicate for the sake of duplication alone, either my work or that of any other individual. Individuality of expression is, without question, an artist's most valuable asset. You could make no more fatal error than to attempt to duplicate for the sake of duplication alone, either my work or that of any other individual. Use another style as a crutch only, until you can walk alone. Trends of popularity are as changeable as weather. Anatomy, perspective, values remain constant, but you must diligently search for new ways to apply them. The greatest problem here is to provide you with a solid basis that will nurture individuality and not produce imitation. I grant that a certain amount of imitation in the earliest phase of learning may be necessary in order that self-expression may have an essential background. But there can be no progress in any art or craft without an accumulation of individual experience. The experience comes best through your own effort or observation, through self-instruction, the reading of a book, or study of an old master. These experiences are bundled together to form your working knowledge, and the process should never stop. New creative ideas are usually variants of the old. In the volume, I shall try to treat the figure as a living thing, its power of movement related to its structure, and its movement separated into several kinds. We should draw the nude for the purpose of better understanding the draped figure. We shall think of the figure as possessed of bulk and weight, as being exposed to light and therefore shadow. We shall think of the figure as possessed of bulk and weight, as being exposed to light and therefore shadow, and hence set into space as we know it. Then we shall try to understand light for what it is, and how form, with its planes of various direction, is affected by it. We shall consider the head and its structure separately. In other words, we shall provide a foundation that will enable you to make your figures original and convincing. The interpretation, the type, the pose, the drama, the costume, and the accessories will all be yours. In other words, we shall provide a foundation that will enable you to make the figures original and convincing. The interpretation, the type, the pose, the drama, the costume, and the accessories will all be yours. Whether your figures are drawn for an advertisement to illustrate a story, or for a poster or a calendar, will not change appreciably the fundamental demands upon your knowledge. Technique is not so important as the young artist is inclined to believe. The living and emotional qualities, the idealization you put into your work, are far more important. So are your selection and taste in costume and setting, provided you have mastered fundamentals. The smartest dress in the world will not be effective on a badly drawn figure. Expression or emotion cannot possibly be drawn into a face that is poorly constructed. You cannot point in color successfully without some conception of light and color values, or even hope to build a composition of figures until you know how to draw them in absolute perspective. Your job is to glorify and idealize the everyday material about you. Your job is to glorify and idealize the everyday material about you. It is my purpose from the start to finish of this book to lend you a hand to the top of the hill, but upon reaching the crest to push you over and leave you on your own momentum. I've hired and paid the best models I could find, knowing that the limited funds of the average young artist would not permit that. If you study my drawings in the light of a model posing for you, rather than thinking of them as something to duplicate line for line and tone for tone, I think you will in the end derive greater benefit. With every page, I suggest you place your pad at the side of the book. Try to get the meaning behind the drawing. With every duplicate, duplicated line for line and tone for tone, I think you will in the end derive greater benefit. With every page, I suggest you place your pad at the side of the book. Try to get the meaning behind the drawing much more than the drawing itself. Keep your pencil as busy as possible. Try figures varying as much as possible from those in my pages. Try figures varying as much as possible from those in my pages. Set up figures roughly from imagination. Make them do all sorts of action. If it's possible to draw from the live model in school or elsewhere, do so by all means, utilizing as best you can the fundamentals we have here. If you can take photos or have access to them, try your skills in drawing from them, adding what idealization you think should be there. It might be a good plan to read the entire book at the start so that you will better understand the general plan of the procedure. Other kind of drawing, such as still life, should be supplemented for all the forms present in the general problem of contour, planes, light and shadow. Get used to using a soft pencil that will give considerable range from light to dark. A thin, weak and grey drawing has practically no commercial value. The switching to a pen and black drawing it is not only interesting but has real value commercially. Use one that is fairly flexible. Pull the pen to make your line, never push it at the paper. Pull the pen to make the line. Never use it to push the paper, for it will only catch and splutter. Charcoal is a fine medium for study. A large tissue or layout pad is excellent to work on. Perhaps the best way is to suggest to use the book in whatever manner suits you the best. The approach to figure drawing. The first chapter of this book will be treated a little differently from the others, as a prelude to the actual figure, and to lay the groundwork for the structure we are later to build. This part of the book will be of a special value to the layout man and to the artist for the preparation of preliminary sketches, roughs, and setting down of ideas, suggestions of actions and pose, where the figure must be drawn without the use of models or copy. The first chapter in this book will be treated a little differently from the others, as a prelude to the actual figure and to lay the groundwork of the structure we are later to build. This part of the book will be of a special value to the layout man and to the artist for the preparation of preliminary sketches, roughs, and setting down of ideas, suggestions of action and pose where the figure must be drawn without the use of models or copy. This is the sort of work the artist does in advance of the finished work. This, in other words, is the work with which he sells himself to the prospective client. This is the sort of work the artist does in advance of the finished work. This, in other words, is the work with which he sells himself to the prospective client. In that respect, it is most important since it really creates opportunity. He will be able to prepare this work intelligently so that when he gets to the final work, he will not be confused with new problems of perspective, spacing, and other difficulties. He will be able to prepare this work intelligently so that when he gets to the final work, he will not be confused with the new problems of perspective, spacing, and other difficulties. This is the sort of work the artist does in advance of finishing the work. This, in other words, is the work with which he sells himself to the prospective client. The first chapter of this book will be treated a little differently from the others. As a prelude to the actual figure and to lay the groundwork of the structure we are later to build. This part of the book will be of a special value to the layout man and to the artist for the preparation of preliminary sketches, roughs, and setting down of ideas. Suggestions of actions and pose where the figure must be drawn without the use of models or copy. This is the sort of work the artist does in advance of the finished work. This, in other words, is the work with which he sells himself to the prospective client. In that respect, it is most important since it really creates the opportunity. He will be able to prepare this work intelligently so that when he gets to the final work, he will not be confused with the new problems of perspective, spacing, and other difficulties. The reader is urged to give this chapter his utmost attention since it is unquestionably the most important chapter in the book and the one to pay good dividends for the concentrated effort involved. Alright guys, I'm gonna go get something to drink. Let's take a little 5 and we'll start with Andrew Loomis's chapter 1. There's a lot to be read, a lot to be learned, so stay tuned. We will be drawing at some point, but honestly I do want to get through the whole book so I kind of understand what Andrew is doing for us here, and once I get through the whole book, maybe that's when I go back and actually start putting that all into practice. But yeah, so I think that's what I'll do. Get through the entire book, and so far the introduction was really enjoyable to read. It seems to kind of reflect and put into words a lot of things that I've experienced myself, and it also seems that Andrew kind of is addressing all the problems that all the artists would normally have, and I believe that we all have like at least a variation of these problems at some point. So yeah, just give me a second here and I will be back after I get a drink for myself. Alright, I'm back. Also guys, turns out I'm not like the most expressive reader anyway, so turned out to be a little monochromatic sometimes. So if that bothers you, well, I'll try to do more expressive expressions, but still, like when I'm trying to understand the book, it just helps me to read it like that, like kind of start reading and then at the end just give it a pause so I can like instill all that learning into my body. So I forgot to shake my stick. Okay. The approach to figure drawing. Start with the chapter 1. Andrew states the most important one to learn. And this is our main selling point because this kind of gives us all the fundamentals that we need to get through, to get started with figure drawing. Even though I have some experience with figure drawing, I'm reading this with a complete open mind, seeing wherever I can learn new things, I will try to learn them and accumulate them in my own process. And yeah, learning from a legend is legendary anyway, so right. Alright, let's get to it. Let me see if my music is still copyright free. No, it's not. I might get flagged for this, but I'm gonna play the copyright free one again. So this is 38 minutes, so next session 38 minutes of reading. Let's get it, baby. Okay, the approach to figure drawing. The approach to figure drawing. As we begin the book, let us take the note of the broad field of opportunity afforded the figure draftsman. As we begin the book, let us take note of the broad field of opportunity afforded the figure draftsman. Starting with the comic or simple line drawing of the newspaper, it extends all the way up through every kind of poster, display, and magazine advertising, through covers and story illustration to the realms of fine art, portraiture, sculpture, and mural decoration. Figure drawing presents the broadest opportunity from the standpoint of earning any artistic endeavor. Coupled with the fact is the great advantage that all these uses are so interrelated that success in one almost assures success in another. The interrelation of all these uses springs from the fact that all figure drawing is based on the same fundamentals, which can be applied no matter what you use the work is to put to. What use the work is to put to. The interrelation of these uses spring from the fact that all figure drawing is based on the same fundamentals, which can be applied no matter what use the work is put to. This brings a further great advantage to the figure in that he has constant market if he is capable of good work. The market is constant because his work fits into so many notches in the cycle of buying and selling, which must always be present, barring financial collapse. To sell one must advertise, to sell one must advertise. To advertise, one must have advertising space. To have that advertising space, there must be attractively illustrated magazines, billboards, and other mediums. So to start the chain of uses of which the artist is an integral part. So starts the chain of uses of which the artist is an integral part. To top it all, it becomes the most fascinating of any art effort because it offers such endless variety encompassing so much that it ever remains new and stimulating. Dealing with the human aspects of life, it runs the gamut of expression, emotion, gesture, environment. Expression, emotion, gesture, environment, and the interpretation of character. What other field of effort offers so great a variety of interest and genuine relief from monotony? I speak of this to build within you that confidence that all is well once you arrive at your destination. Your real concern is making the journey. Art, in its broadest sense, is a language, a message that can be expressed better in no other way. It tells us what a product looks like and how we can use it. Art, in its broadest sense, is a language, a message that can be expressed better in no other way. It tells us what a product looks like and how we can use it. It describes the clothes and even the manners of other times. In a war poster, it insinuates it's in a war poster it incites us to action. In a magazine, it makes characters alive and vivid. It projects an idea visually so that before a brick is laid, we may see before our eyes the finished building. There was a time when the artist withdrew to a bare attic to live in seclusion for an ideal. For subject, a plate of apples sufficed. Today, however, art has become an integral part of our lives, and the successful artist cannot set himself apart. He must do a certain job in a definite manner to a definite purpose with the specified date of delivery. Start at once to take a new interest in people. Look for typical characters everywhere. Familiarize yourself with the characteristics and details that distinguish them. What is arrogance in terms of light and shadow, form and color? What is arrogance in terms of light and shadow? Form and color? What does arrogance look like? It looks like arrogance. What lines give frustration and forlorn hope to people? What is the gesture in relation to emotion? Why is a certain childish face adorable when a certain adult face suspicious or untrustworthy? You must search for the answers to these questions and be able to make them clear to your public. This knowledge will in time become a part of you, but it can come only from observation and understanding. Try to develop the habit of observing your surroundings carefully. Someday you might want to place a figure in a similar atmosphere. You cannot succeed completely with the figure unless you can draw the details of the setting. So begin now to collect a file of the details that give a setting its atmosphere. Mood boards. Learn to observe significant details. You must be concerned with more than Martha's hairdresser. And to observe significant details, you must be considered more than Martha's hairdress. Precisely why does Martha, in a formal gown, look so different in shortened slacks? How do the fold of her dress breaks at the folds when she sits down? What emotional gestures and expressions? What does a girl do with her hand when she says, "Oh, that's wonderful"? Or with her feet when she drops into a chair and says, "Gosh, I'm tired"? What does a mother's face register when she appeals to the doctor? Is there no hope? Or a child when he says, "Gee, that's good"? Gee, that's good. You must have more than mere technical ability to produce a good drawing. Nearly every stressful artist has a particular interest to drive or passion that gives direction to his technical skill. Often it is an absorption in some one phase of life. Harold von Schmidt, for example, loves the outdoors, rural life, horses, the pioneer, the drama, and the action. His work breathes the fire that is in him. Harry Anderson loves Spain, plain American people. The Old Family Doctor, The Little White Cottage. Norman Rockwell, a great portrayal of character, loves a gnarled old hand. Has done a lifetime of work, a shoe that has seen better days. His tender and sympathetic attitude towards humanity, implemented by his marvelous technical ability, has won him his place in the world of art. John Whitcomb and Al Parker are the top because they can set down a pregnant, up to the minute portrayal of young America. The Clark brothers have found fondness for drawing the Old West and frontier days, and have been most successful at it. Maud Fangle loved babies and drew them beautifully. None of these people could have reached the pinnacle without their inner drives, yet none could have arrived there without being able to draw well. I'm just gonna quickly Google all these artists that he is referring to so I know where he's coming from. Often it's the absorption of some one phase of life. Helmut Schmidt, for example, loves outdoors, real life forces, pioneer drama and action. His work reveals the fire that is in him. The Old Family Doctor and Little White Cottage. Norman Rockwell did a great portrait of character loves a gnarled old hand that has done a lifetime of work, a shoe that has seen better days. His tender, sympathetic attitude towards humanity, implemented by his marvelous technique and ability, has won him as his place in the world of art. John Whitcomb and Al Parker are top because they can set down poignant up to the minute portrayal of young America. The Clark brothers have fondness for drawing the Old West and frontier days, and have been most successful at it. Montfangel loved babies and drew them beautifully. None of these people could have reached the pinnacle without their inner drives, yet none could have arrived there without being able to draw well. I do not strongly recommend becoming helper to a successful artist in order to gain background. More often than not, it is a discouraging experience. The reason is that you are continually matching your humble efforts against the stellar performance of an employer. You're not thinking and observing for yourself. You're usually dreaming, developing an inferiority complex, becoming an imitator. Remember, artists have no jealousy guarded professional secrets. How often have I heard students say, if I could just watch that man work, I'm sure I could get ahead. Getting ahead does not happen that way. The only mystery, if such it may be called, is the personal interpretation of the individual artist. He himself probably does not know his own secret. Fundamentals you must master, but you can never do so by watching other men paint. You have to reason them out for yourself. Before you decide what type of drawing you want to concentrate on, it would be wise to consider your particular background or experience. If you have been brought up on a farm, for instance, you are much more likely to succeed in interpreting life on a farm than depicting a Long Island society life. Don't ignore the intimate knowledge that you have gained from long, everyday acquaintance. All of this tend to discount your own experience and knowledge, to consider our background dull and commonplace. But that is a serious mistake. No background is bare enough artistic material. The artist who grew up in poverty can create just as much beauty in drawing tumble-down sheds as other artists might in drawing ornate, luxurious settings. As a matter of fact, he is apt to know much more about life, and his art is likely to have a broader appeal. The artist who grew up in poverty can create just as much beauty in drawing tumble-down sheds as another artist might in drawing ornate and luxurious settings. As a matter of fact, he is apt to know much more about life, and his art is likely to have broader appeal. Today, great interest has developed in the American scene. Simple homelessness is its great general keynote. Our advertising and much of our illustration, however, demand is sophisticated and smart, but it is wise to bear in mind this newer trend for which a humble background is no handicap. It is true that most artists must be prepared to handle any sort of subject on demand, but gradually each one will be chosen for the thing that he does the best. If you do not want to be typed or catalogued, you will have to work hard to widen your scope. It means learning broad drawing principles, everything as proportion, three dimensions, texture, color, light, and shadow, so that you will not be floored by commissions that may call for a bit of still life, a landscape, an animal, or a particular texture such as satin or knit wool. If you learn to observe, the demands should not tax your technical capacity, because the rendering of all form is based upon the way light falls upon the form, and is the way it affects the value and color. Furthermore, you can always do research on any unfamiliar subject. Most artists spend as much time in obtaining suitable data as in actual drawing or painting. The fundamentals of painting and drawing are the same. Perhaps it might be said that drawing in general does not attempt to render the subtleties of values edges and planes or modeling that may be obtained in paint. In any medium, however, the artist is confronted with the same problems. He will have to consider the horizon and viewpoint. He will have to set down properly length, breadth, and thickness, in so far as he is able on the flat surface. He will have to consider in short the elements that I am talking about in this book. The nude human figure must serve as the basis for all figure study. It is impossible to draw the clothed or draped figure without a knowledge of the structure and form of figure underneath. The artist who cannot put the figure together properly does not have one chance in 1,000 of success. A nude human figure must serve as the basis for all figure study. It is impossible to draw the clothed or draped figure without knowledge of the structure and the form of the figure underneath. The artist who cannot put the figure together properly does not have one chance in 1,000 of success, either as a figure draftsman or as a painter. It would be as reasonable to expect to become a surgeon without studying anatomy. If you're offended by the slight of the body the Almighty gave us to live in, then put the book aside at once and likewise give up all If you are offended by the sight of the body the Almighty gave us to live in, then put this book aside at once and likewise give up all thought of a career in art. Since all of us are either male or female, and since figures of the two sexes differ so radically in construction and appearance, a woman in slacks is not the man in pants, even when she has a short haircut. It is fantastic to conceive of a body of figure drawing that did not analyze the many differences. I have been engaged in almost every type of commercial art, and my experience confirms that the fact that the study of the nude is indispensable to any art career that requires figure drawing. A vocational course without such study is a deplorable waste of time. Life classes generally work from living model, hence I have tried to supply drawings that will serve as a substitute. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds of drawing, linear and solid. Linear drawing, for example, a floor plan bases a design and scale. Solid drawing attempts to render bulk or three-dimensional quality on a flat plane of paper or canvas. The first involves no consideration of light and shadow. The latter gives it every consideration. It is possible, however, without light and shadow to make a flat or outline drawing of a figure and still suggest its bulk. Therefore, it is logical to begin with a figure that is flat dimension. Start out with proportion, carry it from the flat to the round, and then proceed to render the bulk in space or in terms of light and shadow. The eye perceives from much more. Let me just read that again. The whole paragraph again. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds of drawing, linear and solid. Linear drawing, for example, a floor plan, embraces design or scale. Solid drawing attempts to render bulk or three-dimensional quality of a flat plane or piece of paper or canvas. The first involves no consideration of light and shadow. The latter gives every consideration. Is it possible, however, without light and shadow to make a flat or outline drawing of a figure and still suggest its bulk? Therefore, it is logical to begin with a figure that is in flat dimensions, start with the proportion, carry it from the flat to the round, and then proceed to render the bulk in space in terms of light and shadow. The eye perceives form much more readily by contour or edge than by modeling. Yet there is really no outline on form, rather, there is a silhouette of contour encompassing as much of the form as we can see from a single viewpoint. We must of necessity limit that form in some way. The eye perceives form much more readily by contour or edge than by modeling. Yet there is no outline on form, rather, there is a silhouette of contour encompassing as much of the form as we can see from a single viewpoint. We must of necessity limit that form in some way. So we draw a line, an outline, An outline truly belongs within the category of flat rendering, though it can be accomplished by the use of light. An outline truly belongs within the category of flat rendering, though it can be accompanied by the use of light and shadow. The painter dispenses with outline because he can define contours against other masses or build out the form in relief by use of values. You must understand the difference between contour and line. A piece of wire presents a line, a contour is an edge. That edge may be sharp in limitation to the form edges of a cube or rounded and disappearing imitation, the contour of a sphere. And many contours pass in front of one another. Like the contours of undulating landscape, line figure drawings, even as landscape drawings demand foreshortening in order to produce the effect of solid form. You cannot outline a figure with a bent wire. You must understand the difference between many contours pass in front of one another, like the contours of an uneven landscape. Line figure drawing, even as landscape drawing, demands foreshortening. In order to produce the effect of a solid form. You cannot outline a figure with a bent wire and hope to render its solid aspect. Look for two kinds of lines, the flowing or rhythmic line, weaving it about the form, and for the sake of stability and structure, the contrasting straight or angular line. Line can have infinite variety or it can be intensely monotonous. Even if you start with the bent wire, you need not make it entirely monotonous. You can vary the weight of line when you're drawing a contour that is near a very light area. You can use a light line or even omit it entirely. When the line represents a contour that is dark and strong, you can give it more weight and vitality. The slightest outline drawing can be inventive and expressive. Line can have infinite variety, or it can be intensely monotonous. Even if you start with a bent wire, you need not make it entirely monotonous. You can vary the weight of line when you're drawing a contour that is in a very light area, and you can use the light line or even omit it entirely. When the light line represents contour that is dark and strong, you can give it more weight and vitality. The slightest outline drawing can be inventive and expressive. Take up your pencil and begin to swing it over your piece of paper. Then let it down. That is a free line, a rhythmic line. Now, grasping your pencil lightly between thumb and index finger, draw lightly or delicately. Bear down as though you really mean it. That is a variable line. See if you can draw a straight line and then set it down to another parallel to it. That is a studied line. See if you can draw a straight line and then set down another parallel line to it. That is a studied line. Rhythmic line, studied line, variable line. If you considered a line as merely a mark, it may be. you consider a line as merely a mark, it may be a revelation to you that line alone possesses so much variation that you can worry over it for the rest of your days. Remember that line is something to turn to when the drawings are dull. You can start expressing your individuality with the kinds of line you draw. Now to the figure. What is the height to width relationship of an ideal figure? An ideal figure standing straight must fit within a certain rectangle. What is that rectangle? See drawing on page 26. The simplest and most convenient unit for measuring the figure is the head. A normal person will fall short of our ideal by half a head. He will measure only 7.5 heads instead of 8. You need not take the 8 heads as an absolute measure. Your ideal man may have any proportions you wish, but he is usually made tall. On pages 26 to 29, you will find various proportions in head unit. Note that at any time you can vary your proportions to suit the particular problem. Study these carefully and draw them 2 or 3 times, for you will use them consciously or not every time you set up a figure. Some artists prefer the legs even a little longer than shown, but if the foot is shown tipped down in perspective, it will add considerable length and be about right. It is remarkable that most beginners' work looks alike. Analyze it, and I have found certain characteristics that should be mentioned here. I suggest you compare this list with your own work to see if you can locate some of the characteristics B for improvement. Consistently great thought. What to do? First get a soft pencil that will make a good block. Pick out the blacks in your subject and state them strongly. By contrast, leave your areas of white where subject is white or very light. Avoid putting overstated grays in light areas. Do not surround things that are light with heavy lines. Second, an overabundance of small fuzzy line. Do not pet in your line, draw it cleanly with long sweep. Do not shade with a multitude of little pecky strokes. Use the side of lead with the pencil laid almost flat for your modeling and shadows. Do not pet in your line, draw it cleanly with strong sweep. Do not shade with a multitude of little pecky strokes. Use the side of the lead with the pencil laid almost flat on the modeling and shadows. 3. Features misplaced on a head. Learn what the construction lines of the head are and how spaced. Build features into the correct spaces. 4th, rubbed and dirty, usually in a roll. Spray with fixative if on thin paper, mount on a heavier stock. Try never to break the surface of the paper, this is very bad. If you've done so, start over. Keep your drawing flat. Keep untouched areas scrupulously clean with a kneaded eraser. Number 5. Do many mediums in the same picture. Make your subject in one medium. Do not combine wax crayons with pencil or pastel with something else. Make it all pencil, all crayon, all pastel, all watercolor, all pen and ink. It gives a certain consistency. Later on, you may combine different mediums effectively, but do not start that way. Number 6. The tendency to use tinted papers. A black and white drawing looks better on white paper than anything else. If you have to use tinted paper, then work in a color that is harmonious. For instance, a brown or red Cont crayon on a tan or cream paper. It is better to put your color on white for clarity. Copies of movie stars. This gets intensely monotonous to anyone inspecting a beginner's work. The heads are usually badly lighted. From a drawing standpoint, take a head that is not well known. Bad arrangement. If you're doing a vignetted head, plan interesting and attractive shapes. Don't run over the edge of the paper unless the whole space is to be squared off. Highlights in chalk. It is very skillful artists to do this successfully. Uninteresting subjects. Just the costume does not make a picture. Every picture should have some interest if possible other than technical demonstration. Head should portray character and expression. Other subjects should have mood or action or sentiment to make it interesting. Watercolor is perhaps the most likely no, Watercolor is perhaps the most tricky medium of all. Yet most beginners take to it. Watercolors are to be effective should be a broad treatment with large loose washes and not too finicky. If you find yourself stippling and packing, you can be pretty sure it will not be liked. Watercolor should have a feeling of the accidental or color that has done something on its own and right that way. Lovely effects are obtained by dampening an area first and then flowing the color in the wet area. Use a real watercolor paper or board for it to get very messy on a soft or very absorbent paper. The less you have to go over what you have once put down, the better. Generally, watercolor prefer not to leave a lot of pencil, especially dark or shade pencil showing through. Some watercolorists work by washing in a general tone, scrubbing all the light areas with a soft sponge or brush, and washing it with the half tones or darks over the original tone. If you're unable to handle watercolor in any other way than by packing in little strokes, I would suggest you try pesto, which can be spread or rubbed at will. Oil paint has the advantage that it stays wet long enough to maneuver the color as you wish. Take any desired height or place points for top of the head and heels. Divide into eighths. 2 1/3 of these units will be the relative width for the male figure. It is not necessary at this stage to attempt to render the anatomy correctly, but fix your mind in divisions. Draw the figure in 3 positions, front, side, and back. Note the comparative widths at shoulders, hips, and calves. Note that the space in take any desired height, or place the points for top of the head and heel. Divide it into eighths. 2 1/3 of these units will be relative width for male figure. It is not necessary at this stage to attempt to render the anatomy correctly, but fix your mind fix in your mind the divisions. Draw the figure in the 3 positions, front, side, and back. Note that the comparative widths of the shoulder, hips, and calves. Note that the space between nipple is 1 head unit. The waist is a little wider than 1 head unit. The wrist drops just below the crotch. The waist is just wider than a head unit. The elbows are about aligned with the navel. The knees are just above the lower quarter of the figure. The shoulders are 1/6 of the way down. The proportion is also given in feet so that you may accurately relate your figure to furniture and interiors. The female figure is relatively narrower. 2 heads are the widest point. Alright guys, I'm going to be back in a little bit and I'm just going to take a little break. It's been an hour and a half, so